I wonder if the day will ever feel lighter than this. The kitchen smelled like the quiet hum of early morning, sunlight spilling across the wooden counter in golden streaks. Marjorie stood by the coffee maker, cradling her favorite ceramic mug, its edges chipped from years of use. Outside, the faint chirp of robins mingled with the soft hum of the neighborhood awakening. She inhaled deeply, savoring that familiar aroma, the steam curling around her fingers like a gentle morning hug. In that moment, she noticed a subtle difference. The way her joints felt a touch lighter, or how the warmth of the coffee seemed to spread more easily through her chest. It was nothing dramatic, nothing her doctor would mark in a chart, yet it carried a quiet sense of hope. Marjorie had recently retired from teaching, and her days had slowed into a rhythm she was still learning to trust. The first sip of her morning coffee had become more than just a caffeine ritual. It had become a time for reflection, a brief pause to connect with herself before the whirlwind of errands and social calls began. One morning, as she watched sunlight dance across the mug, she realized that these small, daily rituals, the warmth, the aroma, the act of sitting quietly, were slowly changing her mornings in ways she hadn't fully noticed before. She smiled at herself, thinking, maybe it's the little things that count the most. Years ago, Marjorie had approached health as a checklist. Vitamins, doctor's appointments, exercise routines. Now, she was learning to notice subtle signals, how her body responded to gentle changes rather than extreme ones. She reflected on the conversation she had with her neighbor, Henry, who had taken up walking after breakfast. It's nothing big, he'd said, but I feel lighter somehow. Just a small shift, and it sticks. Marjorie had laughed, yet the words lingered. Small shifts, she thought, might be exactly what mattered most. Science, in its quiet way, offers a similar story. According to many studies, lifestyle habits like hydration, consuming foods rich in antioxidants, and maintaining gentle routines can support overall vitality. Picture your liver like a well-loved kitchen appliance. Over time, crumbs, splashes, and small messes can build up. They aren't catastrophic, but consistent care, washing, wiping, and using it mindfully keeps it humming efficiently. In Marjorie's world, that metaphor came to life in the warmth of her morning coffee, the ritual of preparing a small breakfast, and the conscious choice to enjoy simple, whole foods. She thought about the handful of berries she would sprinkle on her oatmeal later, the drizzle of olive oil on her toast, each act a tiny nudge toward sustaining her body's natural balance. Marjorie began to explore gentle, practical habits that didn't require overhauls. First, she made a ritual of sipping her coffee slowly, paying attention to the taste, the warmth, the moment itself. No distractions, just a quiet connection to her senses. Second, she started adding a small portion of fruit each morning, noticing how even a few blueberries seemed to brighten her mood. And third, she focused on water intake, another tiny action yet one that made her feel hydrated and energized for the day ahead. Each step felt manageable, human, and satisfying. There was no promise of transformation, no sudden fixes, just a collection of mindful practices that left her feeling subtly, yet unmistakably, nourished. As the sun climbed higher, Marjorie finished her coffee and set the mug in the sink, feeling the comforting weight of her morning ritual settle inside her. She realized she had discovered something quiet and profound, the sense that caring for oneself need not be overwhelming to be meaningful. These small, consistent choices created a soft rhythm, like the gentle pulse of a familiar song that accompanies the ordinary moments of life. She thought about Henry again, imagining him stepping outside, feeling the sun on his face, and she smiled. Perhaps, she mused, it was the accumulation of tiny habits, not grand gestures, that shaped our sense of well-being. In the back of her mind, Marjorie also recognized a philosophical truth. Life is rarely about dramatic transformations. More often, it is about noticing the subtle shifts, the warmth of sunlight, the aroma of coffee, the small victories that pass almost unnoticed. That awareness, she realized, could be as vital to health as any supplement or regimen. She felt a quiet pride in observing these shifts, in honoring the gentle dance between body, mind, and daily ritual. Have you ever noticed how small changes sometimes shift everything? I never thought a carrot could make me pause like this. The morning sunlight slanted through the farmer's market canopy, illuminating the colorful rows of produce. Robert walked slowly past baskets of tomatoes, apples, and leafy greens, until one vivid orange carrot caught his eye. He picked it up, feeling its firm, cool texture between his fingers, and a memory flickered his mother in her tiny kitchen, humming as she chopped vegetables for Sunday dinners. The smell of earthy soil and fresh harvest seemed to wrap around him, transporting him decades back. For a moment, the market buzz, the chatter of vendors, and the laughter of children felt suspended. He smiled quietly, realizing that this small, ordinary vegetable held more meaning than he expected. Robert had recently retired from his job in software design, and life had shifted from structured meetings to leisurely mornings filled with errands, walks, and occasional visits from his grandchildren. On days like this, the farmer's market was more than a place to shop, it was a gentle rhythm that grounded him. Today, holding that carrot, he noticed a subtle curiosity about how little choices like picking vibrant vegetables could ripple through his day. He thought about how his diet had changed since retirement, how he occasionally felt sluggish after convenience foods, and how moments of mindfulness, simply noticing what he ate, seemed to brighten his energy in small but real ways. Robert remembered telling his friend Linda about the carrot later that afternoon. "It's funny," he said. "I never thought a carrot could make me pause like this. But somehow, it just made me feel present." Linda laughed, but he could see the recognition in her eyes. Both of them had spent years pursuing efficiency, checking tasks off lists, and rarely stopping to savor the small, sensory details of life. It was remarkable, he thought, how ordinary moments could suddenly feel extraordinary once you noticed them. Science, in its quiet, patient way, mirrors these observations. Many studies suggest that colorful vegetables, carrots included, contain compounds called carotenoids, which act like tiny brushes supporting the body's natural detoxification pathways. Imagine your liver as a vintage car engine. Over time, small deposits accumulate, and even the gentlest care like nourishing, antioxidant-rich foods can help the system run more smoothly. Carrots, with their rich orange hue, are not a magic fix, but they are part of a broader rhythm of gentle, supportive choices. Robert decided to experiment with a few simple, practical habits that morning. First, he washed and chopped the carrot into sticks for an afternoon snack, savoring each crisp bite. He noticed the sweet, earthy flavor as a small celebration of his intention to eat mindfully. Second, he incorporated other colorful vegetables into his meals, a handful of bell peppers on a salad, a side of roasted squash, allowing his plate to feel vibrant, like a painter's palette. And third, he paid attention to hydration, pairing these snacks with water or herbal tea, giving himself moments of pause rather than rushing through the day. Each action was modest, ordinary even, yet together they wove a subtle sense of well-being that lingered throughout the morning. Walking home from the market, Robert felt the warm sun on his shoulders and the slight crunch of gravel beneath his shoes. He reflected on how small gestures like noticing the brightness of a carrot or taking a few mindful bites could accumulate into something meaningful. Perhaps, he thought, life's richness wasn't in sweeping changes, but in the textures, flavors, and rhythms of daily routines. He remembered his mother's kitchen again, the care she took in simple acts of nourishment, and a quiet gratitude settled in his chest. He also considered a deeper truth, one he had learned over the years: being present with what we consume, honoring our senses, and making small intentional choices could ripple far beyond the plate. It wasn't about perfection or strict rules. It was about noticing, appreciating, and responding to what felt good for the body and soul. Each carrot, each color, each tiny mindful pause became a quiet act of care, a reminder that even ordinary foods could carry subtle, sustaining power. I never thought a cup could quiet the noise in my head. The evening sun slanted across the porch railing, casting long, amber shadows on the wooden floor. Helen sat in her favorite wicker chair, a glass of warm herbal tea cradled between her hands. Tiny curls of steam rose, carrying the faint, grassy scent of chamomile and mint. A soft breeze ruffled the leaves of her potted basil, and for a moment, the world outside, the traffic, the neighbor's barking dog, the distant hum of lawnmowers, felt distant, almost irrelevant. She inhaled slowly, noticing how her shoulders loosened, how her chest felt lighter. There was a rare, quiet pleasure in this simple act, a comfort she hadn't realized she'd missed. Helen had recently moved into a small bungalow after her husband passed, and the days had a new kind of stillness she was learning to inhabit. Mornings were full of errands and light chores, but evenings were hers alone. That first sip of herbal tea, warmed to the perfect temperature, had become a small ritual, an anchor she could return to when life felt heavy. Tonight, as the sun painted the sky with streaks of orange and rose, she found herself reflecting on how little things could create quiet joy, how noticing a single sip, a single scent, could shift her mood more than she expected. Earlier that day, Helen had shared this discovery with her daughter over a phone call. "It's silly," she said, "but sitting down with this little cup feels grounding, like the world slows down for just a moment." Her daughter laughed, but Helen could hear the recognition in her voice. Both of them had spent years rushing, multitasking, trying to be productive. Now, she realized, sometimes the gentlest choices like savoring herbal tea could create the most meaningful pauses. Science, in its quiet elegance, supports such habits. Many studies suggest that herbal teas, like chamomile, peppermint, or green blends, contain compounds that may support gentle bodily rhythms and relaxation. Think of the liver and digestion like a soft garden. A few mindful, nourishing additions like herbs rich in antioxidants act as tiny gardeners, tending and supporting natural processes. These small acts aren't dramatic cures, but they help maintain a harmonious environment inside the body, much like a well-tended garden flourishes with consistent care, rather than sudden bursts of attention. Helen's practical approach was simple but intentional. First, she brewed her tea with care, steeping it slowly while noticing the colors and aromas. Second, she paired it with a small snack, fresh fruit or lightly toasted nuts, turning the moment into a ritual of sensory appreciation rather than a rushed habit. Third, she allowed herself to sit fully present, letting the warmth travel through her hands, chest, and shoulders, noticing the subtle calm that settled in. These steps were small, but over weeks, Helen observed how they shifted her energy. Evenings became restorative rather than draining, and she moved through the next day with slightly more ease and clarity. As the sun slipped below the horizon, painting the porch in dusky lavender and gold, Helen felt a gentle gratitude for these quiet moments. She realized that wellness didn't always arrive in dramatic gestures or complex routines. Often, it was in noticing, savoring, and gently choosing. That glass of green tea was more than a beverage, it was a reminder that small, consistent actions, combined with mindful attention, could nourish body, mind, and spirit. Helen also reflected on a broader life lesson: the things we often overlook, the aroma of a drink, the warmth of sunlight, the softness of a breeze, hold quiet power. By allowing herself to experience these fully, she wasn't just drinking tea. She was practicing presence, care, and kindness toward herself. In this awareness, she found not only calm but a sense of empowerment that didn't rely on perfect health or rigid routines, only on noticing and valuing what already existed around her. Why does the sound of a simple crunch make me feel grounded? The late afternoon sun spilled through the kitchen window, casting a warm, honey-colored glow across the counter. Henry sat at the edge of the table, a small bowl of almonds in front of him. He picked one up, feeling the textured shell between his fingers, and brought it to his lips. The satisfying crack and subtle earthy flavor resonated more than he expected, echoing memories of his childhood kitchen where his father kept a jar of mixed nuts on the counter. Outside, the wind stirred the branches of the maple tree, creating a soft, rustling symphony that mingled with the faint hum of distant traffic. In that moment, Henry felt grounded, anchored in the simplicity of a crunch, a texture, a taste. Henry had recently retired from his decades-long career in accounting, and life had slowed in ways both welcome and unfamiliar. Days once filled with deadlines and spreadsheets now expanded into open stretches of hours. At first, the freedom felt disorienting, but slowly, he learned to notice small pleasures that he had overlooked in busier times. The warmth of sunlight through his kitchen window, the soft scent of roasted nuts, the subtle satisfaction of mindful eating. Today, as he popped an almond into his mouth, he realized how even the tiniest, ordinary actions could anchor him to the present and foster a quiet sense of contentment. Earlier that week, he had shared this observation with his friend Marjorie over tea. "It's silly," he said, laughing, "but the crunch feels like a little reset for my day." Marjorie nodded knowingly. They both understood the subtle joy of simple rituals, the kind of joy that doesn't make headlines but quietly reshapes daily life. Henry realized that these small moments, like the crunch of a nut, were teaching him an overlooked lesson: presence itself could be nourishing. Science quietly echoes this wisdom. Many studies suggest that nuts, such as almonds, walnuts, and pistachios, contain healthy fats, fiber, and antioxidants that support overall vitality. Imagine the body as an old car engine. Over time, the parts need gentle lubrication to keep everything running smoothly. Healthy fats act like that soft, necessary oil, supporting the body's natural rhythms and helping systems work efficiently. They are not miracle fixes, but thoughtful, consistent choices like reaching for a handful of nuts instead of a sugary snack can make subtle differences over time. Henry found practical ways to integrate this wisdom without overcomplicating his routine. First, he kept a small bowl of raw nuts on the counter, making them accessible for mindful snacking. Each bite was intentional, a moment to pause and feel the texture, taste, and aroma. Second, he sprinkled chopped nuts over his morning oatmeal, letting the subtle crunch punctuate the smooth creaminess, turning breakfast into a small ritual of pleasure. Third, he experimented with adding nuts to salads or evening yogurt, savoring the nutty flavors that brightened otherwise ordinary meals. Each act was small, doable, and sensory-rich, yet collectively they created a sense of nourishment and satisfaction that Henry had not anticipated. As the sun dipped lower, turning the sky into shades of amber and rose, Henry felt a quiet gratitude for the simplicity of these small habits. He reflected on how life often presents profound lessons in seemingly mundane moments. A single nut, a crunch, a mindful bite, these were reminders that care could be gentle and impact could be cumulative. He thought about his father, whose jar of nuts had seemed ordinary at the time, and realized that the smallest gestures often leave the deepest impressions. Henry also mused on a larger truth. Life's richness comes not only from grand accomplishments, but from noticing textures, flavors, and rhythms that might otherwise pass unnoticed. By paying attention, savoring, and integrating small, thoughtful actions, he felt empowered to nurture both body and spirit. There was a quiet joy in realizing that even tiny, consistent habits could ripple through his day, fostering vitality and a sense of connection to the present. Somewhere between the sunlight and the soil, I found a tiny spark of joy. The morning air carried the subtle sweetness of dew-soaked earth as Clara wandered through the small berry patch behind her home. Tiny orbs of blue and red peeked through green leaves, catching the sun in miniature bursts of color. She bent down, gently plucking a handful of blueberries, and marveled at the cool, firm texture between her fingers. The familiar tartness of raspberries lingered on her tongue as she tasted one carefully, savoring the contrast with the soft warmth of the sun on her arms. It was a quiet moment, ordinary yet extraordinary, filled with the kind of simple satisfaction that only a personal connection with nature could bring. Clara had taken up gardening in her early 60s, after retiring from her job as a librarian. At first, she had doubted whether she could keep plants alive, let alone enjoy the subtle rewards they offered. But over the months, she began to notice small rhythms: the soil's texture, the scent of leaves after rain, the tiny bees buzzing from flower to flower. Today, as she held a small cluster of berries, she realized that these little fruits were more than food, they were touchstones of presence, reminders that the most delicate efforts could yield sweetness. Earlier that week, Clara had called her granddaughter, who lived across the state, to share the joy of picking berries. "It's like little sparks of color," she said, laughing. "Every handful feels like a tiny celebration." Her granddaughter giggled, and Clara imagined her at home, maybe smiling over a bowl of blueberries herself. The connection, however small, highlighted a truth she had come to appreciate over the years. Small, intentional moments could ripple outward, touching more than just her day. Science quietly supports what Clara experienced. Many studies suggest that berries contain polyphenols, naturally occurring compounds that act like tiny painters, supporting the body's natural processes and helping maintain balance. Imagine the liver and metabolism like a kitchen countertop. Over time, crumbs, spills, and dust gather, but small, consistent care, like nourishing foods rich in antioxidants, helps keep things running smoothly. While berries don't offer magical fixes, their vibrant color and nutrient content are gentle, supportive tools. In a broader, mindful approach to wellness, Clara embraced a few practical ways to incorporate these little bursts of color into her daily life. First, she added a small handful of berries to her morning oatmeal, letting the tart sweetness contrast with the soft warmth of her porridge. Second, she created a simple mid-morning snack, a bowl of mixed berries paired with a few raw nuts, savoring the textures and flavors in mindful bites. Third, she experimented with adding berries to her afternoon herbal tea, infusing it with a subtle, fruity aroma. Each habit was modest, sensory-rich, and easy to maintain, but together, they cultivated a gentle sense of vitality and enjoyment. As the sun climbed higher, warming her arms and the patch around her, Clara felt a quiet gratitude for these tiny rituals. She thought about how small acts picking, tasting, observing could accumulate into a deeper sense of well-being. The joy she experienced was subtle, yet persistent, like sunlight filtering through leaves, warming everything it touched. She realized that nurturing herself could be as simple as noticing the texture of a blueberry, the fragrance of mint, or the sweetness of a ripe raspberry. Clara also considered a broader lesson she had learned over the years. Life's richness is often hidden in details we might overlook. By paying attention to colors, textures, and tastes, and by allowing ourselves to savor small moments, we cultivate a gentle, lasting form of nourishment. These simple acts create a ripple, fostering presence, gratitude, and a quiet sense of empowerment, proof that tiny, consistent choices matter. Even before I chopped it, the smell made me feel at home. The late afternoon kitchen was bathed in soft gold as sunlight filtered through the window blinds. Margaret leaned over the cutting board, her fingers deftly peeling a clove of garlic. The pungent, earthy aroma hit first, curling around her nose and filling the room with memories of Sunday dinners decades ago. She smiled, remembering her father tossing garlic into simmering sauces, humming a tune she could almost still hear. The scent was comforting, grounding more than just a smell. It felt like a gentle thread tying past and present together. Outside, the garden rustled softly in the breeze, the flowers nodding as if in quiet applause for this simple ritual. Margaret had recently started cooking more intentionally after years of hurried meals and prepackaged convenience foods. Each clove of garlic was more than an ingredient. It was a moment to pause, to breathe, and to honor the simple joy of preparing a meal. As she chopped, the rhythmic motion of the knife against the board became almost meditative, connecting her to a sense of continuity and care. She noticed how even small actions, the sound of the knife, the scent in the air, the textures in her hands could anchor her in the present, offering a quiet pleasure she had long overlooked. Earlier that week, she had shared this discovery with her neighbor, James. "It's funny," she said. "I feel calmer just handling garlic. Like it reminds me that I'm part of something bigger, something simple but lasting." James laughed, recalling his own childhood kitchen, and they talked about how familiar aromas could evoke stories, grounding people in the present while reconnecting them to memory. Margaret realized that in these ordinary acts, there was a subtle lesson. Small, sensory-rich rituals could bring both comfort and a gentle sense of empowerment. Science quietly echoes these observations. Many studies suggest that garlic contains compounds that naturally support overall bodily balance, including gentle antioxidant activity. Think of the body as a carefully tended kitchen. Over time, tasks accumulate, surfaces get dusty, and aromas mix. Introducing nourishing foods, like garlic, is like opening a window and letting fresh air in, small, consistent acts that help maintain harmony and vitality. Garlic isn't a magic solution, but including it in meals regularly can be part of a thoughtful, supportive approach to wellness. Margaret embraced a few practical ways to incorporate garlic without making her routine feel burdensome. First, she minced a small clove into her evening sauté, noticing the aroma as it hit the hot pan and letting it awaken her senses. Second, she added crushed garlic to roasted vegetables, letting the flavor infuse each bite, making ordinary meals feel celebratory. Third, she experimented with a simple garlic and olive oil drizzle on warm bread, savoring the combination slowly and intentionally. Each act was modest, sensory-focused, and easy to maintain, yet over time they contributed to a subtle sense of nourishment, warmth, and presence. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the floor, Margaret felt a quiet satisfaction settle in her chest. She realized that life's richness often comes not from dramatic gestures, but from the ordinary, repeated moments that awaken our senses. A clove of garlic, the aroma of a simmering sauce, a memory of family dinners. These were the small, cumulative threads that wove a sense of care and connection into her daily life. Margaret also reflected on a deeper truth. Being mindful of what we touch, smell, and taste can create subtle shifts in how we feel, even without overt effort or strict routines. These small, intentional choices, like handling garlic with awareness, savoring its aroma, and incorporating it into meals, offered her a quiet empowerment that rippled through her day. In this simple ritual, she found both joy and grounding, a reminder that small acts often carry the most enduring comfort. The peel smelled like sunshine trapped in my hand. The kitchen was bathed in morning light, the air crisp with the faint scent of dew from the garden outside. Evelyn held a bright orange in her hands, running her fingers along its textured surface. As she peeled it, the fragrance burst forth, sharp and sweet, curling into the corners of the room and brushing against memories of summers spent at her grandmother's farmhouse. She smiled, inhaling deeply, noticing how the tiny act of peeling, twisting, and savoring released a surprising lift in her spirits. Outside, birds flitted among the budding branches, and the faint clink of a wind chime added a soft, rhythmic soundtrack to her quiet morning ritual. Evelyn had recently begun to notice how her energy shifted with the seasons, and she had learned to appreciate small, natural boosts that didn't require major changes to her routine. Peeling citrus had become a small but significant ritual, an intentional pause to connect with her senses. Each slice she tasted was vibrant, juicy, and refreshing, reminding her of life's small, simple joys. She reflected on how much of her day was spent moving quickly, almost mechanically, and how much richer life became when she slowed down just long enough to savor a moment, a flavor, or a scent. Earlier that week, Evelyn had shared this ritual with her friend Paul over a video call. "It's amazing," she said, laughing, "how something so ordinary can suddenly feel like a tiny celebration." Paul agreed, recalling the lemons his own father would zest for tea, filling the kitchen with the bright, citrusy aroma. Evelyn realized that these moments, peeling, tasting, noticing, were quiet reminders that attention to small sensory details could create meaningful connections, both with ourselves and with those we care about. Science quietly mirrors these everyday discoveries. Many studies indicate that citrus fruits, rich in vitamin C and antioxidants, can gently support overall bodily balance and metabolic health. Imagine the body like a well-loved kitchen. A few drops of lemon juice here, a twist of zest there, and the flavors, aromas, and nutrients come together to create harmony. Citrus isn't a miracle cure, but consistent inclusion in meals and snacks acts like a gentle nudge toward sustaining well-being, much like adding a splash of light to a dim corner. Evelyn found practical, joyful ways to bring citrus into her daily life. First, she squeezed fresh lemon over her morning oatmeal, noticing how the subtle acidity brightened every bite. Second, she added orange segments to her afternoon salad, letting the juices mingle with greens and nuts, turning an ordinary meal into a sensory experience. Third, she brewed a small cup of warm water with a slice of lemon, enjoying the fragrance and warmth before starting her day's errands. Each of these habits was simple, achievable, and deeply satisfying, creating small moments of connection and vitality throughout the day. As sunlight shifted, casting golden patterns across her kitchen, Evelyn felt a quiet gratitude for these small rituals. She reflected on how minor, mindful acts like peeling an orange or savoring a segment could accumulate into a sense of wellness and presence that permeated her day. She realized that life's richness wasn't always in grand gestures, but often in noticing textures, tastes, and scents that might otherwise be overlooked. Evelyn also considered a broader truth. By engaging our senses fully, we cultivate awareness, joy, and subtle empowerment. Each orange peeled, each zest grated, became a tiny act of care, an acknowledgement of the body, mind, and soul's needs. In these quiet moments, she discovered a rhythm of self-nourishment that felt effortless yet profoundly grounding. The golden powder seemed to hum quietly, like sunshine on a winter day. The kitchen smelled faintly of earth and spice, as Thomas measured a small spoonful of turmeric into a warm mug of milk. The rich golden color seemed to glow in the soft morning light streaming through the window. He swirled it gently, watching the color shift and blend, the aroma subtle but unmistakably grounding. Outside, the wind rustled the bare branches of the maple tree, a soft accompaniment to the gentle clink of the spoon against the ceramic mug. With the first sip, Thomas felt warmth spread through his chest, a quiet comfort that reminded him of mornings spent in his grandmother's kitchen, where golden sunlight and spiced scents always seemed to make everything feel possible. Thomas had recently begun exploring gentle wellness rituals after retiring from teaching. Life had slowed, but he was discovering that slowing down didn't mean inactivity. It meant paying attention to subtle pleasures and intentional habits. The turmeric ritual became one of those moments, a pause in the rhythm of the day, a chance to breathe, savor, and notice. He reflected on how he often moved quickly, overlooking the simple pleasures in favor of efficiency, and realized how nourishing even small, sensory-rich practices could be. Earlier that week, he had shared his turmeric routine with his neighbor, Marlene. "It's amazing," he said, "how something so simple can feel like a warm hug from the inside." Marlene laughed softly, agreeing that the ritual offered a quiet grounding, especially on chilly mornings. Thomas thought about how little moments like these, when intentionally observed, could ripple through a day, subtly lifting mood and creating a sense of presence. Science quietly supports these small acts. Turmeric contains curcumin, a compound that many studies suggest may gently support the body's natural processes. Imagine your body as an intricate clockwork. Over time, dust and friction accumulate, and even a small, careful application of oil keeps the gears moving smoothly. Adding turmeric isn't a cure-all, but including it consistently in simple routines can act as a gentle, supportive nudge for overall well-being, like letting a little sunshine in through the window to warm a room. Thomas embraced a few practical ways to incorporate turmeric into his life. First, he brewed a small cup of golden milk each morning, savoring the warmth and color as a quiet start to the day. Second, he added a pinch to soups and roasted vegetables, noticing how the flavor enhanced each bite while giving him a sense of ritual and mindfulness. Third, he experimented with sprinkling a tiny amount over scrambled eggs or in smoothies, appreciating how the bright hue brightened even ordinary meals. Each practice was small, simple, and approachable, yet together they created a sense of warmth, care, and presence that lingered throughout the day. As the sunlight shifted across the kitchen walls, Thomas felt a deep gratitude for these tiny rituals. He thought about how ordinary moments stirring a golden drink, noticing its aroma, tasting its warmth could accumulate into a feeling of subtle well-being. Life's richness, he realized, was often found in small, repeated acts that engaged the senses and nurtured both body and spirit. Thomas also considered a broader lesson. We don't always need grand gestures to create comfort and care. By paying attention to the texture, color, and warmth of simple ingredients, we cultivate presence and empowerment in our daily lives. Turmeric, with its quiet golden glow, became more than a spice. It was a symbol of mindfulness, warmth, and the gentle joy found in small, intentional habits. Even the leaves seemed to whisper a quiet promise. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen window, falling across a wooden cutting board piled with vibrant kale, spinach, and Swiss chard. Margaret ran her fingers along the crisp leaves, feeling the veins and ridges beneath her fingertips. She inhaled, savoring the earthy, fresh aroma, and felt a subtle sense of energy ripple through her body. Outside, the garden glistened with dew, the leaves trembling as birds flitted from branch to branch. The morning was still, filled with tiny, unnoticed movements that made life feel rich and alive. Margaret smiled, realizing that these simple moments, the texture, the smell, the vibrant green, could evoke calm, presence, and a sense of care. Margaret had recently returned to more intentional cooking after years of fast meals and skipped lunches. Incorporating leafy greens had become more than a dietary choice. It was a ritual of connection with her own vitality. Each handful she washed, chopped, and cooked reminded her of childhood summers in her grandmother's garden, where every green leaf seemed like a small miracle of life. These greens, humble and unassuming, held a quiet power to anchor her day, reminding her that wellness often came in simple, repeated habits. Earlier that week, she had shared this practice with her neighbor, Elaine. "It feels like these leaves are whispering to me," Margaret said, laughing softly. Elaine nodded, recalling her own morning routine of blending spinach into smoothies, feeling subtly energized but quietly nourished. Margaret realized that the act of preparing greens, noticing their textures, and incorporating them into meals was itself a gentle form of mindfulness, a daily acknowledgement that she valued her health and presence. Science quietly supports this wisdom. Many studies suggest that leafy greens are rich in vitamins, minerals, and antioxidants, which may gently support liver health, metabolic balance, and overall vitality. Think of the body as a garden. Leaves, stems, and roots all work together, and adding greens is like providing compost and care to nourish the soil. Over time, these consistent, mindful habits help maintain a flourishing, resilient internal ecosystem. Greens aren't a miracle solution, but they are a supportive foundation for long-term wellness. Margaret discovered practical ways to incorporate greens without making her routine feel overwhelming. First, she sautéed a handful of kale with garlic and a drizzle of olive oil, letting the aroma fill the kitchen as a comforting signal of nourishment. Second, she blended spinach into morning smoothies, pairing it with berries for a sensory-rich experience that was both sweet and earthy. Third, she added Swiss chard or baby greens to soups and stews, appreciating how the vibrant color brightened her meals and her mood. These small, consistent habits created subtle energy shifts and fostered a sense of pride in tending to her own health. As the sun rose higher, casting playful shadows across her countertop, Margaret felt a quiet satisfaction settle in her chest. She reflected on how even ordinary, repeated actions washing, chopping, savoring greens could accumulate into profound wellness over time. The richness of life, she realized, was often hidden in everyday rituals that engaged the senses and cultivated presence. Margaret also recognized a broader lesson. Small, mindful choices, repeated with care, quietly transform the rhythm of life. Each leaf prepared, each meal thoughtfully composed, became a gentle affirmation of self-respect and presence. In embracing these tiny, sensory-rich acts, she discovered a steady, enduring form of empowerment, proof that even the simplest ingredients can nourish both body and soul. Steam curled from the bowl, carrying the scent of quiet mornings. The kitchen was filled with the soft glow of early sunlight as David stirred a pot of oatmeal on the stove. Each bubble and hiss seemed to mark the rhythm of the morning, a quiet heartbeat in an otherwise still house. He sprinkled a handful of chopped walnuts and a few blueberries over the top, watching the colors blend with the creamy texture. Steam carried a sweet, nutty aroma into the room, wrapping him in a gentle comfort that felt like a warm hug. Outside, the neighborhood was awakening, birds chirping, leaves trembling in the breeze, but inside, the kitchen felt like a sanctuary of calm. David had always loved oatmeal as a child, but over the years it had become more than just a breakfast. It was a ritual, a moment of grounding before the day began. Since retiring, he had learned to savor these small sensory pleasures, appreciating the warmth, texture, and subtle sweetness as part of a mindful practice. Each bite reminded him of simpler times, the mornings when life moved slowly and attention was a gift freely given. Today, as he sat at the table with his steaming bowl, he felt a gentle satisfaction ripple through him, a quiet, nurturing start to the day. Earlier that week, he had shared his oatmeal ritual with his daughter over a video call. "It's funny," he said, smiling, "but just stirring the bowl makes me feel like I'm starting the day with a little ceremony." His daughter laughed, noting that she often rushed through her breakfast, missing the simple pleasure of paying attention. David realized that these small, repeated acts, stirring, tasting, noticing, were quietly shaping his daily life, bringing a sense of presence and care that he had underestimated. Science quietly mirrors these observations. Whole grains like oats contain fiber, vitamins, and minerals that many studies suggest gently support digestion, metabolic balance, and overall vitality. Imagine the body as a well-tended kitchen. Consistent, nourishing ingredients help keep everything in balance, like carefully measuring spices into a recipe. Oatmeal isn't a magical fix, but integrating it thoughtfully into your routine is a small, achievable act that nurtures long-term wellness. David incorporated a few practical habits to make oatmeal both enjoyable and nourishing. First, he prepared a warm bowl each morning, layering in fruits, nuts, and a hint of cinnamon for aroma and flavor. Second, he experimented with overnight oats for busy mornings, allowing the textures to meld and offering a convenient, healthy start to the day. Third, he shared the ritual with visiting grandchildren, letting them choose toppings and encouraging them to savor each bite, turning breakfast into both nourishment and connection. Each habit was simple, sensory-rich, and easy to maintain, yet collectively they fostered a quiet sense of joy and presence. As the sunlight shifted across the kitchen walls, David reflected on the power of these small, intentional acts. A bowl of oatmeal, thoughtfully prepared and savored, became more than food. It was a reminder that even ordinary routines could offer warmth, comfort, and mindfulness. The richness of life, he realized, often lies in simple rituals repeated with attention and care. David also noted a deeper lesson. Nurturing ourselves doesn't require grand gestures or complicated plans. Small, consistent habits, like preparing oatmeal, mindfully create a gentle sense of empowerment, presence, and well-being. In these ordinary moments, he discovered that comfort, health, and joy could coexist effortlessly. The steam curled into the air, carrying whispers I hadn't realized I missed. The late afternoon light slanted softly through the kitchen window, casting a warm amber glow on the teapot sitting on the stove. Clara reached for her favorite mug, feeling the smooth ceramic under her fingertips, and added a spoonful of chamomile, a dash of mint, and a hint of dried lavender. The subtle, earthy aroma rose immediately, mingling with the soft rustle of leaves outside and the distant hum of a neighbor's lawnmower. She lifted the steaming cup to her nose, inhaling deeply, and felt a gentle calm wash over her, a quiet pause from the busyness of the day, a grounding in the present moment. Clara had recently returned to a more intentional daily rhythm after decades of work that demanded constant movement and attention elsewhere. She had discovered that small rituals, like preparing a cup of herbal tea, could anchor her day, offering a rare space for reflection and mindfulness. The act of choosing herbs, measuring them carefully, pouring the hot water, and waiting for the steeping process became more than preparation. It became a meditation in motion. Each subtle aroma, each curling wisp of steam, drew her attention into her senses, reminding her that calm could be found in ordinary routines. Earlier that week, Clara had shared this ritual with her friend Grace over a video call. "I never realized how much I'd been rushing," Clara said, smiling softly. "Just sitting with a cup of tea feels like a small act of self-care I've been missing for years." Grace laughed, confessing that she often brewed tea mindlessly, forgetting to pause and truly savor it. Clara realized that this gentle ritual offered more than warmth, it offered presence. She thought about how we often overlook the simplest forms of nourishment, focusing instead on dramatic changes or grand gestures, when quiet, repeated acts can quietly transform our well-being. Science gently mirrors these everyday insights. Many studies suggest that herbal teas, particularly blends like chamomile, peppermint, and lavender, may support relaxation and overall digestive balance. Imagine the body like a quiet study. A few moments of attentive care, a gentle aroma, and soft sounds help the mind and body reset. Tea isn't a cure or fix-all. It is a small, consistent practice that fosters calm, presence, and gentle support for wellness. In this way, the ritual becomes less about the beverage itself and more about the deliberate attention it encourages and acknowledgement that we deserve moments of pause and care. Clara found several practical ways to deepen this sensory-rich ritual. First, she dedicated a corner of her kitchen as her tea space, keeping small jars of herbs, a wooden spoon, and her favorite mug ready for daily use. Second, she created a small routine. She would steep her tea for exactly 5 minutes, using the waiting time to stretch gently, close her eyes, and focus on breathing. Third, she experimented with pairing her tea with tiny mindfulness prompts, like noticing the warmth in her palms or savoring the aroma as if she were experiencing it for the first time. These simple, intentional habits brought a surprising sense of calm, almost like creating tiny islands of tranquility within the day. On one particularly gray afternoon, as rain tapped softly against the windows, Clara settled into her chair with a steaming mug and felt an unexpected wave of gratitude. She reflected on the small acts that had accumulated to shape her days. The gentle aroma of herbs, the warmth of a cup in her hands, the quiet awareness that she was present with herself. She noticed how these small pauses seemed to ripple outward, influencing her mood, her patience, and even her interactions with others. It wasn't about perfection or a dramatic change. It was about noticing and valuing the ordinary, sensory-rich moments that often pass unnoticed. Clara also realized that tea had become a vehicle for connection. On quiet mornings, she brewed an extra cup for her husband, leaving it by his chair before he awoke, and later shared a cup with her grandchildren when they visited. The act, simple as it seemed, carried an unspoken message of care, patience, and attention. In this way, herbal tea was both personal and relational, a subtle gesture that nurtured body, mind, and heart. As she sipped the last of her tea, Clara felt a deep sense of calm and satisfaction. Life, she realized, was not made up only of milestones and achievements, but of these quiet rituals that anchor us to the present and cultivate a gentle, enduring sense of well-being. Each cup of tea became a small but profound affirmation that self-care can be simple, that presence matters, and that quiet joy often comes in tiny, repeated acts. The handful in my palm felt like a treasure chest, tiny gems of energy and memory. The late afternoon sunlight spilled through the kitchen window, casting a warm glow on the wooden countertop where Robert poured a mix of almonds, walnuts, and pumpkin seeds into a small ceramic bowl. The faint, nutty aroma rose immediately, mingling with the scent of warm bread cooling on the counter. He lifted a few nuts to his palm, rolling them gently between his fingers, noticing their textures, the smoothness of almonds, the ridges of walnuts, the tiny seeds that almost seemed like grains of sand. It was a simple gesture, yet somehow it carried weight, a reminder that small, consistent choices can nourish the body and mind in ways we often overlook. Robert had recently begun paying closer attention to his diet after noticing subtle dips in energy throughout the day. For years, he had relied on quick snacks, cookies, chips, packaged bars that offered immediate satisfaction but left him feeling hollow hours later. Introducing a simple ritual of mindful snacking with nuts and seeds changed his perspective. The act of pouring a handful, observing the shapes and colors, feeling the textures, and slowly tasting each one became an unexpected meditation, a moment of presence in an otherwise fast-paced world. Earlier that week, he had shared this practice with his friend Laura. "It's funny," Robert said, smiling, "but just noticing the feel and taste of these tiny seeds makes me feel grounded. I didn't expect such a small thing to feel so meaningful." Laura nodded thoughtfully, admitting that she too often snacked absent-mindedly, missing the subtle enjoyment and nourishment right in front of her. Robert realized that these small, sensory-rich practices weren't about perfection or restriction. They were about honoring the body, valuing moments of mindfulness, and cultivating subtle energy and vitality. Science quietly reinforces this wisdom. Nuts and seeds are rich in healthy fats, fiber, and antioxidants, which many studies suggest can gently support cardiovascular health, metabolic balance, and overall vitality. Imagine the body like a well-tended garden. Each nut or seed is a nutrient-rich drop of compost that nourishes the soil, encouraging resilience and growth. Small, consistent inclusion of these foods doesn't create instant transformation, but over time, it helps maintain a steady sense of strength and balance, a gentle foundation for long-term wellness. Robert embraced practical, everyday ways to incorporate nuts and seeds without disrupting his routines. First, he kept a small jar on the counter and poured a handful each afternoon while reading or listening to music, turning a simple snack into a mindful pause. Second, he sprinkled seeds over salads, roasted vegetables, and even oatmeal, noticing how the crunch added both texture and subtle satisfaction to every bite. Third, he experimented with blending nuts into smoothies, or lightly toasting them with a pinch of cinnamon and nutmeg, creating sensory-rich, nourishing moments that felt indulgent without excess. Each of these small, deliberate choices was easy to maintain, yet together they fostered a sustained sense of energy, focus, and quiet pleasure throughout the day. One particular evening, as golden hour light streamed across the kitchen, Robert reflected on the deeper lesson in these tiny rituals. Life, he realized, wasn't only shaped by dramatic changes or heroic efforts. It was quietly built by consistent, mindful acts, pouring a handful of nuts, savoring textures, noticing aromas. These moments became threads in a fabric of daily care that anchored him emotionally, physically, and mentally. He noticed how something as small as a snack could become a symbol of attention, respect for the self, and subtle empowerment. Robert also recognized how these habits carried relational meaning. When his grandchildren visited, he invited them to choose their favorite nuts and seeds from the jar, sharing stories of his own childhood snacks and teaching them to savor textures and flavors with attention. These tiny moments became opportunities for connection, a bridge between generations, and a gentle way to instill habits of mindfulness and nourishment in those he loved. By the time he finished his last handful, the kitchen glowed with quiet warmth. Robert felt a sense of satisfaction not from indulgence but from care. Care for himself, for the body that carried him through the day, and for the simple, repeated rituals that made ordinary moments extraordinary. Nuts and seeds, unassuming as they seemed, had become more than food. They were symbols of presence, grounding, and enduring vitality. Each berry felt like a tiny jewel, sweet and alive in my hand. The morning light poured through the window, illuminating the counter where Sarah arranged a small bowl of fresh blueberries, raspberries, and blackberries. She picked up a plump blueberry and rolled it between her fingers, noticing the smooth skin and the slight give as she pressed it gently. The sweet, tangy aroma filled the kitchen, mingling with the faint scent of toasted bread from the oven. Outside, the garden was just waking. A breeze rustled through the raspberry canes, and a few early birds hopped along the flower beds. The world seemed to pause, as if waiting for her to take that first bite, to notice, to savor. Sarah had recently made it a habit to incorporate berries into her mornings. Life had grown slower after retiring from her career as a school librarian, and she had realized that small, deliberate acts could enhance her day more than she ever expected. Picking up a berry, inhaling its aroma, rolling it in her hand, and finally tasting it became a ritual of mindfulness. With each bite, she felt a subtle lift, a quiet energy that was both physical and emotional. The berries seemed to capture the essence of summer in their vibrant colors and flavors, offering a sensory experience that reminded her of childhood berry-picking adventures in her grandmother's garden. Earlier that week, she had shared a small tray of berries with her neighbor, Ben, as a casual mid-morning snack. "It's amazing," Sarah said, smiling, "how something so small can make you feel so awake and alive." Ben laughed, admitting that he often overlooked these little treasures, defaulting to coffee or pastries out of habit. Sarah realized that berries were more than a treat. They were a gentle invitation to slow down, to notice, and to savor life's smaller pleasures. These tiny, colorful fruits had a way of connecting her past and present, memory and moment, nourishment and joy. Science quietly reinforces this everyday observation. Many studies suggest that berries are rich in antioxidants, vitamins, and fiber, which may gently support cognitive function, metabolic balance, and overall vitality. Imagine the body as a sunlit garden. Each berry is a drop of vibrant water, a spark of color, a nutrient-rich gift that encourages energy, resilience, and balance. Over time, these small, consistent additions to the diet help create a steady foundation for wellness, not through instant transformation, but through gentle, cumulative care. Sarah discovered practical ways to incorporate berries into her daily routine. First, she added a handful to her morning oatmeal or yogurt, enjoying the sweet tart contrast and the bursts of texture that made each spoonful a sensory adventure. Second, she blended berries into smoothies with a splash of almond milk and a sprinkle of chia seeds, delighting in the rich purple hue that seemed to glow from within the glass. Third, she experimented with lightly roasting berries with a drizzle of honey to add to her afternoon tea, noticing how the aroma and warmth offered a comforting, meditative pause. Each habit was simple, approachable, and pleasurable, yet together they created subtle energy, presence, and joy that carried her through the day. One rainy afternoon, as Sarah sat by the window watching droplets trickle down the glass, she reflected on the unexpected impact of these tiny fruits. It wasn't just the taste or the nutrients. They were a reminder that small, mindful choices could cultivate both pleasure and vitality. The act of noticing color, texture, aroma, and flavor became an anchor, a daily ritual that brought awareness, gratitude, and a quiet sense of empowerment. Each berry, tiny as it seemed, contributed to a sense of abundance in her life, a reminder that nourishment could be joyful, simple, and accessible. Sarah also realized that berries had a subtle social and emotional dimension. She often packed a small container for her granddaughter when visiting, letting her choose her favorites and teaching her to savor the colors and flavors with attention. These moments created shared pleasure, gentle learning, and intergenerational connection. In this way, berries became more than food. They were a symbol of care, presence, and quiet celebration of life's small wonders. By the time she finished the last spoonful, Sunlight had softened across the kitchen, casting gentle shadows on the counter. Sarah felt a deep satisfaction, not from indulgence, but from mindful attention, connection, and the small acts of care she had woven into her day. Life, she realized, was composed of these seemingly minor rituals, quietly shaping wellness, joy, and presence in ways that mattered far more than grand gestures ever could. The smell of earth clung to the carrots, sweet and familiar, as if the soil itself remembered me. The kitchen was filled with the rich, earthy aroma of roasting root vegetables. Mia carefully arranged thick slices of carrots, sweet potatoes, and parsnips on a baking sheet, drizzling them lightly with olive oil and sprinkling a pinch of rosemary over the top. The oven hummed quietly, warming the air and filling the room with the scent of earthy sweetness. Outside, the late autumn wind rattled the remaining leaves on the maple tree. But inside, the kitchen felt like a cozy sanctuary, a place where time slowed and senses awakened. She picked up a carrot slice, feeling its firmness and vibrant color, and inhaled deeply, savoring a connection to soil, sunlight, and seasons past. Mia had recently returned to a more grounded, intentional approach to meals after years of relying on prepackaged convenience foods. She had learned that cooking root vegetables from scratch was not just about nutrition, it was about reconnecting to the rhythm of the earth and the seasons. Each slice, each drizzle of oil, each turn on the baking sheet was a meditation, a quiet acknowledgement that care could be found in small, deliberate acts. These simple moments, she realized, offered more than sustenance. They offered grounding, presence, and a subtle sense of accomplishment. Earlier that week, Mia had shared roasted root vegetables with her neighbor, Thomas, inviting him to taste the natural sweetness brought out by the oven. "It's remarkable," Thomas said, biting into a roasted carrot, "how something so simple can feel so satisfying and alive." Mia nodded, smiling. She reflected on how often she had rushed through meals in the past, missing the textures, aromas, and colors that could turn ordinary food into a sensory experience. Root vegetables had become a reminder that nourishment was not just about calories or nutrients, it was about presence, attention, and connection to the natural world. Science quietly supports these observations. Many studies indicate that root vegetables are rich in fiber, vitamins, minerals, and phytonutrients, which may gently support digestion, metabolic balance, and overall vitality. Imagine the body like a network of interconnected roots in a garden. Each nutrient-dense vegetable offers sustenance to different parts of the system, helping maintain strength and resilience over time. The effect is not instantaneous or miraculous, but cumulative and steady, like layers of soil nourishing the plants above. Including root vegetables consistently creates a gentle foundation for long-term well-being. Mia found practical, approachable ways to incorporate root vegetables into her routine. First, she roasted a medley for her dinners, experimenting with simple seasonings like rosemary, thyme, or a dash of cinnamon to enhance natural sweetness. Second, she prepared mashed sweet potatoes with a touch of olive oil for a creamy, comforting side dish that felt indulgent yet wholesome. Third, she incorporated grated carrots and parsnips into salads or soups, adding both texture and color while subtly boosting nutrition. Each preparation was straightforward, achievable, and adaptable. Yet together they formed a ritual of care, presence, and nourishment that she began to cherish deeply. One chilly evening, as dusk settled and shadows stretched across the kitchen floor, Mia paused with a warm plate in hand. She noticed how something as simple as chopping, roasting, and savoring root vegetables could evoke a sense of calm, satisfaction, and groundedness. Life, she realized, was composed of small, repeated acts of care, paying attention to textures, aromas, and flavors, noticing the glow of the oven light, sharing warmth with neighbors or family. These ordinary moments, when infused with presence, became extraordinary, weaving a quiet tapestry of wellness and resilience. Mia also recognized a subtle, relational dimension to these rituals. When her grandchildren visited, she let them peel carrots and sweet potatoes, showing them how the colors, shapes, and textures could make cooking an adventure. Together, they created small traditions that extended beyond nutrition, teaching mindfulness, patience, and connection with the natural world. In this way, Root vegetables became more than food. They were a bridge between generations, a tactile lesson in care, and a gentle reminder of the grounding power of nature. By the time she finished her meal, the kitchen was quiet, glowing with warmth and lingering aromas. Mia felt a sense of deep contentment, not from indulgence, but from attention, care, and presence. She reflected on the lesson that even ordinary acts, washing, chopping, roasting, and savoring, could cultivate strength, grounding, and subtle empowerment. Life, she realized, was made richer not only by grand achievements, but by the steady, mindful rituals that connected her to the earth, her senses, and those she loved. The zest of an orange made the kitchen hum, like sunlight captured in a peel. The late morning sun streamed through the kitchen window, highlighting the vibrant oranges, lemons, and limes arranged in a rustic wooden bowl on the counter. Helen picked up a plump orange, rolling it gently in her palm, feeling its slight weight and smooth, dimpled skin. She inhaled deeply, letting the bright, tangy aroma fill her senses. Outside, the garden buzzed softly with the hum of bees and the chatter of morning birds, but inside, the air seemed infused with light and energy. The simple act of peeling an orange, she realized, could carry an unexpected sense of joy and presence, a small, daily ritual that grounded her in the rhythm of life. Helen had recently embraced a habit of incorporating citrus into her daily routine, noticing subtle but meaningful effects on her mood and energy. She would slice a lemon into warm water first thing in the morning, savoring the tart brightness that awakened her senses, or enjoy a few segments of fresh orange during breakfast. These small acts of sensory awareness, feeling the peel, noticing the scent, observing the juice, glisten, offered more than refreshment. They became moments of mindfulness, small pockets of joy that punctuated her day. Helen often marveled at how something so ordinary could feel unexpectedly special when approached with attention. Earlier that week, she shared a citrus snack with her friend Carla during a mid-morning walk. "It's amazing," Helen said, laughing as she handed over a slice of orange, "how something so simple can make you feel alive." Carla smiled and agreed, admitting she rarely paused to notice the vibrancy of the fruits she consumed. Helen realized that citrus, with its radiant color, lively aroma, and zesty flavor, offered a gentle invitation to slow down, savor, and engage fully with the moment. The fruit's bright color seemed to mirror an internal lift, a subtle, natural reminder of the body's capacity for vitality and energy. Science gently supports these observations. Many studies suggest that citrus fruits contain vitamin C, flavonoids, and antioxidants that may contribute to immune support, healthy skin, and gentle metabolic balance. Think of the body like a sunlit window. A squeeze of lemon or a segment of orange allows light, nutrients, and freshness to pass through, brightening the space within. The effects are cumulative and subtle, not instantaneous or miraculous, but they create a foundation of wellness that can quietly support day-to-day vitality. Helen discovered practical ways to integrate citrus into her life with ease and enjoyment. First, she began her mornings with a warm glass of water infused with lemon and a sprig of mint, noticing the aroma, the warmth, and the tang on her tongue as a gentle wake-up ritual. Second, she added orange segments to her oatmeal or yogurt, pairing the sweet tart fruit with texture and creaminess for a sensory-rich breakfast. Third, she experimented with zesting lemon or lime over roasted vegetables, salads, or whole grains, enjoying the burst of aroma and flavor that elevated ordinary dishes into a moment of mindful attention. These small actions were achievable, pleasant, and adaptable, yet collectively, they transformed everyday meals into rituals of care and awareness. One golden afternoon, as Helen savored a slice of grapefruit by the window, she reflected on the quiet ways that citrus had subtly reshaped her daily experience. It wasn't the fruit alone, it was the attention, the sensory immersion, the intentional pause that accompanied it. Life, she realized, was built of these small, repeated acts of care, noticing the brightness of a peel, savoring a tart segment, letting aroma awaken the senses. Each action, no matter how small, rippled outward, infusing energy, presence, and a sense of joy into her day. Helen also recognized the relational magic of citrus. When her grandchildren came over, she let them help peel oranges, showing them how the zest carried fragrance, the segments burst with juice, and the colors brightened their hands. Together, they created tiny moments of delight and connection, linking nutrition with playfulness and mindfulness. In this way, citrus became more than a fruit. It was a medium for presence, attention, and shared joy. A reminder that small, intentional gestures could nurture both body and spirit. By the time she finished her last slice, the sunlight had softened across the kitchen, casting warm reflections on the wooden countertop. Helen felt a sense of calm, energy, and satisfaction, not from indulgence, but from mindful presence, connection, and care. She realized that life's richness often came not from grand gestures, but from small, repeated rituals that brought attention, joy, and vitality into ordinary moments. Citrus, simple yet radiant, had become her daily companion, a bright thread woven into the fabric of her wellness and well-being. The smell of freshly baked bread wrapped around me like a soft, familiar hug. The kitchen was alive with the comforting aroma of oats and barley simmering gently on the stove. Daniel stirred a pot of steel-cut oats, watching the creamy texture thicken slowly, releasing a nutty fragrance that seemed to fill the room with warmth. He sprinkled in a handful of toasted walnuts and a few plump raisins, noticing how each ingredient added color, texture, and subtle sweetness. Outside, the first hints of winter frost shimmered on the garden, but inside, the kitchen felt like a sanctuary, a space where time slowed, senses sharpened, and moments became rich with presence. Holding the warm bowl in his hands, Daniel felt a small but profound sense of grounding, as if the very grains carried with them the earth's quiet patience. Daniel had recently embraced the practice of incorporating whole grains into his daily routine. Years of quick breakfasts, white bread, sugary cereals, instant oatmeal had left him feeling sluggish by mid-morning. He had learned that slow-cooked oats, farro, barley, or quinoa not only provided lasting energy but also offered a tactile, sensory-rich experience that could turn an ordinary meal into a small act of care. Watching the grains swell, stirring them slowly, noticing their textures and aromas, he found himself anchored in the present, mindful, and unexpectedly joyful. Earlier that week, Daniel had shared a bowl of farro salad with his neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, during a casual lunch. "I've never thought about grains this way," she said, picking up a spoonful, "but it feels grounding." Daniel smiled, realizing that whole grains were more than just food. They were a gentle reminder of resilience, patience, and the beauty of slow, deliberate care. In every bite, there was texture, substance, and quiet energy, teaching a subtle lesson about nourishing the body in a way that supported both vitality and mindfulness. Science quietly supports this everyday wisdom. Many studies suggest that whole grains are rich in fiber, B vitamins, and essential minerals, which may gently support digestion, steady blood sugar, and overall cardiovascular health. Imagine the body like a finely tuned engine. Grains act as slow-burning fuel, providing steady energy throughout the day rather than sudden spikes and crashes. Including whole grains consistently is not a miracle cure, but it builds a foundation of resilience and balance over time, like well-maintained soil supporting a strong, flourishing garden. Daniel found practical ways to incorporate whole grains into his daily life. First, he prepared steel-cut oats in the morning with a slow simmer, experimenting with small additions like cinnamon, nutmeg, or fresh berries, savoring the evolving aroma and creaminess. Second, he baked small loaves of whole grain bread for the week, enjoying the tactile process of kneading dough, feeling it transform under his hands, and smelling the warmth of the oven fill his home. Third, he added grains like quinoa or farro to soups and salads, appreciating the hearty texture and subtle nutty flavors that elevated simple meals into nourishing rituals. Each action was manageable, sensory-rich, and adaptable, yet together, they formed a daily practice that grounded him in body and mind. One quiet evening, as snow began to fall outside the window, Daniel settled into his favorite chair with a warm bowl of barley porridge. He noticed how something as simple as preparing and savoring whole grains had become an anchor for his day, fostering calm, energy, and a quiet sense of accomplishment. Life, he realized, was often shaped less by dramatic events than by repeated, intentional rituals. The stirring of oats, the kneading of dough, the mindful chewing of each bite. These small acts created a rhythm, a continuity that brought both nourishment and presence to ordinary moments. Daniel also discovered the subtle relational dimension of these rituals. When his grandchildren came over, He invited them to help mix ingredients for bread or sprinkle toppings on oatmeal, teaching them the textures, smells, and slow process of creating nourishing meals. These shared experiences became opportunities for connection, learning, and mindful presence, a bridge between generations, and a gentle way to pass on a legacy of care and appreciation for wholesome food. By the time he finished his bowl, the kitchen glowed with warmth, and the quiet hum of the oven had faded. Daniel felt a sense of satisfaction, not from indulgence, but from attentiveness, presence, and care. He reflected on how the ordinary grains, hands in dough, steam rising from a pot, could carry extraordinary meaning, nurturing body, mind, and spirit. Whole grains, simple yet profound, had become more than food. They were symbols of resilience, grounding, and the quiet strength built into daily rituals. The beans simmered quietly, each one a tiny promise of warmth and sustenance. The kitchen smelled faintly of garlic and earthy spices as Robert stirred a pot of lentils, the gentle bubbling creating a rhythm as comforting as a soft heartbeat. Sunlight filtered through the window, glinting off the rim of the pot and casting a golden glow across the countertop. He scooped a few lentils onto a spoon, observing their subtle sheen and feeling the warmth radiate through the metal. Outside, leaves tumbled slowly from the maple tree, whispering in the crisp autumn breeze, but inside, the kitchen hummed with quiet life. Each small legume seemed full of purpose, like tiny reservoirs of energy, waiting to be transformed into nourishment. Robert had recently started exploring legumes as a daily staple, after noticing a dip in energy during his long afternoon walks. Lentils, chickpeas, black beans, and navy beans became more than ingredients. They were a source of comfort, mindfulness, and subtle vitality. Preparing them from scratch, watching them soften in the simmering water, and seasoning them thoughtfully became a meditative act, allowing him to slow down and reconnect with the rhythm of daily life. Each step, rinsing, soaking, simmering, tasting, felt like a gentle ritual of care, a way to honor both body and day. Earlier that week, Robert had invited his neighbor, Lydia, over for a simple bean salad, tossed with a drizzle of olive oil, lemon juice, and a few sprigs of fresh parsley. "These are amazing," she said, lifting a forkful. "I didn't realize beans could taste so fresh and lively." Robert smiled, noticing how something so humble could bring both joy and nourishment. Legumes, he realized, were quietly transformative, not in the dramatic sense of overnight change, but in the way they steadily built resilience, fullness, and calm presence. The beans became symbols of patience, warmth, and understated strength. Science gently supports this intuition. Many studies suggest that legumes are rich in fiber, protein, B vitamins, and minerals, which may help support digestive health, steady energy, and heart health. Think of the body as a patchwork quilt. Each legume contributes a thread, reinforcing structure, filling gaps, and adding quiet strength. Their benefits are cumulative, subtle, and long-lasting, like a steady fire that warms a room over time rather than an instant burst of heat. Robert discovered practical ways to integrate legumes into his daily life. First, he prepared a simple lentil stew, lightly spiced with cumin and smoked paprika, savoring the aroma and the tender texture. Second, he roasted chickpeas with olive oil and herbs for a crunchy snack that felt indulgent yet nourishing. Third, he added black beans to salads, whole grain bowls, and soups, appreciating the hearty texture and subtle earthy flavor that elevated everyday meals into moments of comfort and presence. Each preparation was straightforward, achievable, and adaptable, yet together they created a consistent rhythm of mindful eating that fostered both energy and satisfaction. One quiet evening, as dusk settled and the kitchen lights cast a soft glow across the room, Robert sat down with a steaming bowl of lentil soup. He reflected on how these simple legumes, small and unassuming, had transformed his daily experience. It wasn't just the sustenance, it was the process, the attention, and the connection. Life, he realized, was composed of repeated, small acts that grounded him and brought comfort. Stirring beans in a pot, observing their transformation, and savoring each bite became quiet rituals of wellness, reminding him that strength and vitality often arrive in understated, patient ways. Robert also noticed the relational magic of legumes. When his grandchildren visited, he let them measure, rinse, and stir beans, teaching them to notice color, texture, and aroma. They laughed as some beans spilled, their curiosity and hands-on participation creating moments of connection and play. Legumes, ordinary yet full of potential, became a medium for teaching patience, care, and mindful presence, linking generations through shared food rituals. By the time he finished his bowl, the kitchen was still except for the soft bubbling of residual lentils. Robert felt a warm sense of satisfaction, not from indulgence, but from attention, presence, and the nurturing quality of slow, thoughtful preparation. He reflected on how ordinary ingredients, handled with care and intention, could cultivate vitality, grounding, and subtle joy. Legumes, simple yet profound, had become a daily anchor, a reminder that energy, nourishment, and comfort often arise from the smallest, most deliberate acts. The cucumber slices glistened like tiny rivers of morning light on my plate. The kitchen smelled crisp and fresh, a faint scent of citrus mingling with the earthy aroma of cucumbers and bell peppers. Elaine arranged a small platter of cucumber slices, watermelon cubes, celery sticks, and juicy cherry tomatoes. The colors were vivid, deep green, soft pink, and bright red, each piece reflecting sunlight streaming through the window. She lifted a slice of watermelon to her lips, feeling its cool, watery sweetness dissolve with each bite. Outside, the garden shimmered with dew, and birds hopped along the fence, chirping as though celebrating the morning. In this simple ritual, Elaine felt alive, present, and deeply attuned to the subtle pleasures of sensory nourishment. Elaine had recently discovered the gentle benefits of hydrating fruits and vegetables. After years of neglecting water-rich foods, she had noticed that her energy levels and focus often dipped by mid-afternoon. By including cucumbers, celery, tomatoes, and fruits like watermelon and oranges, she found a quiet lift, an effortless, sensory-rich way to refresh and support her body. The act of preparing these foods, washing, slicing, arranging, became a mindful ritual, an opportunity to slow down and appreciate textures, colors, and flavors. Each bite was a reminder that nourishment could be light, refreshing, and joyful, not just functional or habitual. Earlier that week, Elaine had prepared a hydrating vegetable platter for a small garden gathering with friends. "I didn't realize how refreshing this could be," said her neighbor, Karen, taking a bite of crisp cucumber. Elaine smiled, noticing how something so simple could provide both pleasure and subtle energy. Hydrating foods, she realized, were more than a snack. They were a gentle, nurturing presence on the plate, offering balance, satisfaction, and a quiet invitation to mindfulness. They were reminders that well-being could come from small, consistent choices woven into daily life. Science gently supports these observations. Many studies suggest that water-rich fruits and vegetables provide hydration, vitamins, antioxidants, and minerals, which may help maintain energy, skin health, and overall vitality. Imagine the body like a delicate fountain. Each hydrating food acts as a trickle of water, replenishing and refreshing the system in a steady, supportive way. The effect is subtle, cumulative, and restorative, like morning dew sustaining leaves in a garden, quiet but essential for ongoing health and well-being. Elaine discovered practical ways to include these foods effortlessly. First, she prepared a small platter each morning with cucumber, celery, cherry tomatoes, and watermelon cubes, enjoying the visual appeal, the crisp textures, and the cool taste as a mid-morning ritual. Second, she infused water with slices of cucumber or citrus, creating a gentle, flavorful hydration practice that encouraged her to sip throughout the day. Third, she blended hydrating fruits and vegetables into smoothies, adding a touch of leafy greens or a sprinkle of chia seeds, turning hydration into a pleasurable and nourishing routine. Each approach was simple, adaptable, and sustainable, yet together they created a rhythm of refreshment and care that became an anchor for daily energy and presence. One sunny afternoon, as the light shifted across the kitchen counter and spilled over the wooden cutting board, Elaine paused to reflect on the small yet profound ways these foods influenced her well-being. She noticed how the simple act of slicing a cucumber or biting into watermelon could reset her senses, provide subtle energy, and remind her to slow down and savor the present moment. Life, she realized, was built from repeated, mindful acts, the arrangement of food, the observation of color, the enjoyment of texture that together nurtured body, mind, and spirit. Elaine also observed the relational dimension of these practices. When her grandchildren visited, she invited them to help wash, slice, and arrange the fruits and vegetables, turning the activity into playful, tactile lessons in observation, patience, and sensory appreciation. Together, they discovered the joy of crunch, juiciness, and natural sweetness, reinforcing both connection and mindful presence. Hydrating foods, simple yet vivid, became a medium for shared learning, care, and attention to the ordinary pleasures of life. By the time she finished her last slice of watermelon, the kitchen glowed in the afternoon sun. Elaine felt a sense of quiet vitality, not from indulgence, but from attention, mindfulness, and the nurturing act of preparation. She reflected on how ordinary, sensory-rich rituals, cutting, arranging, savoring, could cultivate energy, presence, and well-being. Hydrating fruits and vegetables, unassuming yet vibrant, had become a gentle daily reminder that small, consistent acts could refresh both body and spirit, bringing subtle vitality into everyday life. The almonds and sunflower seeds spilled onto the table, tiny treasures catching the afternoon light. The afternoon sun filtered through the kitchen window, casting a warm glow over a wooden bowl filled with almonds, walnuts, pumpkin seeds, and sunflower seeds. Harold ran his fingers over the textured surfaces, noticing the ridges, the faint sheen, and the earthy aroma that rose as he gently shook the bowl. Outside, the garden was quiet except for the occasional flutter of a bird landing on the fence, yet inside, the room felt alive with warmth and comfort. Each nut and seed seemed to carry a story of care, patience, and natural abundance. A small but potent reminder of the richness that could be found in simple, intentional choices. Harold had recently begun incorporating nuts and seeds into his daily life after noticing that his afternoons often left him low on energy. He discovered that a small handful of almonds, walnuts, or pumpkin seeds provided not only a satisfying texture and flavor but also a subtle, sustaining energy that could last for hours. Preparing them became a mindful ritual. Sorting, smelling, lightly toasting, and enjoying them slowly. Each action invited presence, attention, and gratitude, reminding Harold that wellness was built from small, repeated acts rather than sudden, dramatic changes. Earlier in the week, Harold had shared a mix of roasted nuts and seeds with his friend Diane during a quiet afternoon chat. "These feel like little nuggets of care," Diane said, smiling as she crunched into a walnut, "almost like they're giving you a gentle boost from the inside out." Harold laughed softly, realizing that nuts and seeds were more than snacks. They were miniature rituals of nourishment, sensory pleasure, and self-kindness. Each bite offered texture, subtle richness, and an almost meditative rhythm that invited him to slow down and savor the ordinary, creating a space where nourishment met mindfulness. Science quietly supports these observations. Many studies suggest that nuts and seeds are rich in healthy fats, protein, fiber, and essential vitamins and minerals, which may gently support heart health, cognitive function, and sustained energy. Think of the body as a finely tuned clock. Each nut and seed adds a small but precise gear, helping maintain steady function, resilience, and quiet strength. The effects are cumulative, subtle, and long-lasting, like a slow rhythm that supports everything else in motion without fanfare or rush. Harold discovered practical ways to integrate these nutrient-rich foods into his daily routine. First, he kept a small jar of mixed nuts and seeds at his desk, enjoying a mindful handful mid-morning while observing the garden outside, letting the textures and flavors anchor him in the moment. Second, he added walnuts and pumpkin seeds to his oatmeal or yogurt, watching how the nutty aroma, crunchy texture, and natural oils enriched his meals. Third, he experimented with lightly toasting almonds and sprinkling sunflower seeds over salads or roasted vegetables, savoring how such simple additions could elevate the ordinary into something thoughtful and nourishing. Each action was simple, manageable, and adaptable, yet collectively they created a ritual that quietly enhanced his day. One golden evening, as the light softened and cast long shadows across the kitchen floor, Harold paused, with a small bowl of mixed nuts in hand. He reflected on the cumulative impact of these small, sensory-rich rituals. The almonds, sunflower seeds, and walnuts were more than nutrition. They were reminders to pay attention, to savor, and to honor both his body and the day. Life, he realized, was composed of repeated, gentle acts of care, each contributing to a sense of grounding, energy, and well-being. The ordinary could be extraordinary when approached with attention, presence, and intention. Harold also noticed how nuts and seeds fostered connection. When his grandchildren came over, he let them sort, count, and sprinkle the nuts on oatmeal or yogurt, turning a simple act into a playful exploration of texture, smell, and sound. Laughter filled the kitchen as they discovered the crunch of almonds or the softness of sunflower seeds, linking mindfulness, nourishment, and intergenerational connection. In these moments, the nuts and seeds became symbols of patience, presence, and shared care, a quiet, grounding joy passed down across generations. By the time Harold finished his small bowl, the kitchen was bathed in the last warm rays of sunlight. He felt a deep sense of satisfaction not from indulgence, but from attentiveness, ritual, and the quiet joy of small, deliberate actions. He reflected on the journey of the past chapters, the citrus, whole grains, leafy greens, legumes, hydrating fruits and vegetables, and now nuts and seeds. Each element was a thread woven into the fabric of daily life, creating patterns of care, mindfulness, and vitality. He realized that life's richness often arose not from grand gestures, but from the steady accumulation of tiny, thoughtful choices. Harold smiled, imagining that each day could hold similar moments of presence and attention. With each small act, peeling an orange, stirring oats, sautéing greens, simmering lentils, slicing watermelon, or savoring a handful of nuts, he felt connected to both himself and the world around him. There was a quiet beauty in these rituals, a gentle empowerment, and a subtle joy that lingered long after the act itself. Nuts and seeds, humble yet potent, had become a final, grounding note in the symphony of mindful, nourishing living. Have you ever noticed how small changes sometimes shift everything?